Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. In 2023 I covered over 50 forgotten RPGs and action adventures, which was kinda wild. This will be the first episode in 2024 in this series, although I did a similar video last week where I covered some more forgotten RPGs. But that video was a bit different because it focused on a specific studio and all of their RPGs from 2007 to 2021. Check it out if you missed it somehow. So, this video is officially the 11th episode of Hidden Gems or Trash, where I play various RPGs, action adventures, and similar genre of games. I try my best to provide a comprehensive, short review about all of these games.
You must be out of your mind!
And as always, the main objective is to find some true hidden gems, which are worth playing today. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor. Moonlight Blade Mobile is an exciting AAA MMORPG. Whether you like multiplayer games, PvP battles, or you simply enjoy a thrilling story, there's something for everyone. You will uncover dark secrets and mysteries of this world in the compelling storyline of Moonlight's Blade. The carefully crafted world is filled with stunning landscapes, detailed character models, and breathtaking special effects. You will experience picturesque weather with 4 seasons, spring, summer, fall and winter, with AAA quality graphics. Moonlight Blade Mobile is available on all devices. You can play it on Android, iOS and PC. The PC version is in Full HD, with refresh rates up to 120Hz, which makes the gameplay buttery smooth. There is a cross-platform multiplayer feature, which allows you to team up with friends from all around the world, regardless of the device they're using. You can team up in various PvP modes like 1 vs 1 or 5 vs 5 groups, including Guild Wars and Battle Royale modes that stand out among other open-world MMORPGs. Rise to the top of the leaderboards and gain exclusive rewards, fame and recognition. Download Moonlight Blade Mobile now by using my link in the description and get some exclusive rewards. Number 5. Call for Heroes Pompolic Wars. This is a very obscure third-person action RPG which came out in 2007. It's very hard to find a proper copy nowadays and you have to do some serious digging. The reception for this game was terrible. IGN gave it 1.2 and the actual review is funny as well. Notice to innocent consumers, avoid Call for Heroes as your life depends on it. It's enough to destroy your motivation to ever game again. Who hurt you, bro? You can tell that whoever reviewed the game was seriously pissed off. So, is this game really that bad? Well, I can certainly see why it got some poor reviews back in the day. However, I expected to experience a much worse game in general. I can tell you straight away that I played way worse games than this, especially in this series of videos. Call for Heroes can be described as a simple hack and slash RPG with very old school level design. First of all, this game looks like it came out in 2003 or 2004 rather than 2007. But the game runs good on high resolutions and I don't hate how it looks in general. You won't have any technical issues with the game though, which is always a plus. I think these people were huge fans of Serious Sam games and the artistic style bears the resemblance to those crazy run and gun shooters. Even some enemy types are pretty similar. The resolution of textures is very low and most of these assets look very muddy, but the overall theme of the visuals is not bad. Some levels look very generic though, while others have a bit more varied look. The visual style is not the only thing which is similar to old first-person shooters. The level design in Call for Heroes will make you feel like you're playing in early 2000s or even late 90s first-person shooters. But instead of finding a key or two, in order to progress to the next level, you need to find around 15 or 20. Yeah, they really took this concept and just expanded it, quite literally. It's truly as simple as it sounds and the game doesn't even have a story, as far as I'm aware. I didn't finish all the 15 levels, so I'm not exactly sure. But I don't think you'll begin the story of the game after about 6 levels, it doesn't make any sense. When you begin the game, you can choose between 2 classes, a warrior or Amazon. I played with the warrior only. You begin the game immediately and you only get a simple weapon and some tutorial hints. Controlling your character feels awkward at first because walking speed is very low. When you use the sprint key, it becomes much more enjoyable and faster. Strafing is significantly faster than going forward, and you'll quickly learn why. This will be your main defense strategy basically, whether you're fighting melee or ranged enemies. Attacking is very straightforward, but some weapons require you to have mana. I was kinda surprised how good some of the weapons feel. Most of them have special attacks that you can trigger with the right mouse button, but you need to have mana, like I said. You will level up when you gain enough experience or skulls, which all dead enemies drop. There are some unique skills to learn upon leveling up, and for some stupid reason the default key is enter, so I had to change that. It's very easy to get a hang of the action combat, and to tell you the truth, it doesn't feel that bad. I learned some frost skills which are great to combine with melee weapons, and when you get the hang of it, the combat can be very fast paced. The biggest problem with the gameplay is the level design, which I mentioned before. Up to the point where it almost ruins the entire game, it can be very frustrating. More often than not, you'll be stuck on a level for a while because you can't seem to find the last couple of keys, and enemies will frequently respawn when you pick up some items. Speaking of which, you'll need to pick up mana, health and green mana potions as well. Picking up these items is more frustrating than it ever should be because you need to go straight through them, which is much harder than it looks for some reason. I completed about 5 levels and got really bored because of the level design, not because of the combat. Overall, it was a fun old game to experience, which I'll probably never play again. Number 4. Eternity: The Last Unicorn. Eternity: The Last Unicorn is an action RPG released in 2019 for PC, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. This game had a pretty bad reception across all platforms. Despite that, I really wanted to give this game a chance because it looks kinda unique. This game reminds me of old Resident Evil games, and for a good reason. It plays very similar to those games, especially because of the fixed camera angles. But instead of using guns and killing zombies, you use swords and a bow and kill creatures from the Norse mythology. Instead of Leon and Claire, you play as Oren and Bjor. You get a picture, right? The premise of this game is very interesting, but The Last Unicorn suffers from bad design decisions, as well as annoying technical issues. RPG features like the character progression, itemization and crafting are very underwhelming. But let's start from the beginning. The beginning of the game has an intro cutscene that's supposed to introduce you to the story. There is no narration or any kind of voice acting in the game, so you will have to do a lot of reading. I understand that voice acting is pretty challenging for a small indie developer, especially back then, but they could have hired at least one person to narrate the intro cutscene. It seems very lazy, to be honest. Putting that aside, the story is not very interesting in general. The last unicorn is captured by some witches, and your main goal is to save it. That's pretty much everything you need to know. You'll meet a couple of friendly characters here and there, but the dialogue is just okay at best. Eternity is not a very good looking game, to say the least. It's developed in Unreal Engine 4, but it looks like it came from Unreal Engine 3 at best. The fidelity is very low, even on the highest settings, and you can't push the resolution above 1080p for some reason. On the bright side, I think there are enough different looking locations in the game to keep the exploration interesting. For the most part, I did enjoy the fixed camera angles, except when they get in the way of combat. Come to think of it, that happened a lot in some areas. However, the fixed camera angles are only a small problem in the grand scheme of things. The map is like a semi-open world, with a couple of interconnected areas, separated by a loading screen. In the beginning, you start playing with the elf, but as you progress you will unlock the Viking Bjor. You'll get to switch between these two characters a lot at certain points in the game. These areas usually require you to do some simple puzzles, fight some enemies, and figure out where you need to go next. You're going to do a lot of backtracking, which can be very annoying because the enemies respawn a lot in this game. We need to talk a little bit about the combat before I explain why this is so bad. The combat in this game is very mindless. You can spam the regular attack with both of these characters with an occasional dodge here and there and win most fights. Your dodge seems to have some iframes, sometimes. I could never get used to timing of the dodge, and I'm usually pretty decent at avoiding telegraphed attacks in games, even in some very janky RPGs. It's usually just better to move away completely and come back to deal some damage, instead of trying to iframe the attack. This is only the case with the bosses and elite monsters. First of all, controlling these characters doesn't feel very good in general, but it's not horrible. The problem is, sometimes your character just won't respond to commands, like, at all. I had to reload the game a couple of times when this happened, or press random buttons until the controls go back to normal. The biggest issue with this particular problem is how the game saves your progress. You can only save the game at certain places on the map, and when you reach a checkpoint. The game will aggressively respawn enemies whenever you go back to previous locations, which feels extremely cheap. You're going to kill the same enemy types over and over again, and the game reuses a lot of the same fights throughout the entire game. Which would be fine if the respawn rates were normal or non-existing. I don't even know why this game respawns enemies at all. In fact, it would make much more sense if they didn't respawn at all, considering how levels are designed and the amount of backtracking you have to do. The AI can be exploited easily by just stepping outside of the range and attacking them from behind while they retreat. This game has just one fixed difficulty, which is a good idea, but the balancing is all over the place. The elf is a lot weaker in general, which makes the beginning of the game very frustrating, mostly because she can't take a lot of damage before she dies. Then you unlock the Viking Björn and you can just relentlessly spam the attack button and kill everything without too many issues. This balances out a little bit when you start using the bow with the elf, but still, the Viking feels much better in general. His attacks have better animations as well. Both characters can build up a special attack, which of course can get bugged right before the first boss fight. Leveling up is automatic, which means that you don't get to control anything. You can only check out your stats in the menu for no apparent reason. You can upgrade your weapons and do some basic crafting though, but that's pretty much it. I did like most of the puzzles and some secrets on these levels, but that's about it. Overall, I really wanted to like this game simply because it has a cool concept. I would not recommend playing it unless you can get for $5 or less. Maybe not even then. Number 3. Archangel.
I am Nevaeh. People say that I am a witch.
Greetings, Nevaeh. I don't know what people say. I only know that I see a beautiful woman.
Archangel is an action RPG released in 2002 by Metropolis Software. Metropolis Software was a Polish studio which acquired the rights for the Witcher IP way before CD Projekt Red's. This studio worked on the first version of The Witcher that was supposed to come out in the 90s or the early 2000s. In 2008, CD Projekt Red acquired Metropolis Software, but they closed it down in 2009. That's a really fun trivia about this little Polish studio. Michael, the protagonist from Archangel, looks really similar to Geralt from The Witcher 1. The hair, the scars on the body, and even the monster slaying segment of the game reminds me a lot about the legendary monster slayer from The Witcher. Anyway, this game is abandonware, so you can't find it on GOG or Steam, but it's very easy to find with a simple Google search. I didn't have any notable technical issues, except the resolution. If you want to play in full HD or higher resolutions, you have to manually edit the text file in the documents. I started playing on 4K, but later on I had to change the resolution back to 1080p, because I got tired of squinting my eyes in order to see the UI elements. The game looks pretty good on 1080p, and it won't give you any headaches if you want to install it nowadays. However, even though I really like this game, it's very hard to recommend it.
I feel for you. This is a terrible tragedy.
In fact, I almost gave up and didn't even want to include the game in the video, because my first impressions were pretty bad. The combat is not very enjoyable, especially in the beginning of the game. But I'm glad I didn't quit and actually managed to finish the game in a couple of sittings. Archangel has some very unique ideas, especially when it comes to the setting, or settings to be more precise. Archangel begins in the modern era when Michael, the protagonist, ends up in a car accident. He wakes up in the old ages, which is also the name of the first chapter. You get to meet a couple of monks from the ancient temple who tells you they've been expecting you for a long time. Apparently Michael is the chosen one who is supposed to get rid of the demons in the village. The demons have put a curse on this village and they are messing with people's minds, possessing them and eventually killing them. Michael then gains some powers from the Lord of the Light, and this is where you have an important choice to make. You can choose to gain a warrior form or a ghost form. This is a big part of the gameplay because you will use these forms a lot. I of course went with the warrior, but I want to replay the game with the ghost form. Then the angel tells you the main goal, which is to find 3 powerful stones. By the way, every dialogue line is voice acted in the game and there is a fair amount of dialogue in general. The quality of voice acting is okay, especially considering that this is a 2002 game.
The people in the village are dying. The plague is eating their bodies, turning their brains into clay. The village elder says it's because of your kind. Speak, you are their master. What can you say in your defense?
If Michael's voice sounds familiar, that's because this is the same guy who voiced Geralt of Rivia from the Witcher series. Yeah, I didn't tell you that Metropolis Software was also the first one to hire Doug Cockle as the voice actor for the main character in the game.
What's wrong, fella? You look like something terrible's happened.
Like I mentioned before, Michael even looks very similar to Geralt. Speaking of the visuals, Archangel looks very outdated for today's standards, but there is something very impressive about the visuals in the game. As you progress through the chapters, the whole setting of the game changes, along with the visual style of the game. The second chapter has an amazing number of unique looking assets, even in the places that you can easily miss. They managed to cram a lot of details and unique textures in various buildings and areas you're going to explore. I mean, some of these textures are a pixelated mess, but even so, it's still very impressive stuff. For example, this hotel room is crammed with small details. That's one of the reasons why this game managed to stay so immersive despite its old age and the drastic change of settings throughout the chapters. The first chapter is set in the old ages and you get to explore the swamp, the village and a very big dungeon. The first chapter of the game doesn't do it justice in terms of the visuals because the swamp and the village look very generic. Despite that, the atmosphere that the game creates is freaking amazing even today. The music is also a huge part when it comes to this. It's a great soundtrack in general. It perfectly adjusts to the change of the setting as well. So, what about the gameplay? Well, it's pretty bad to be honest. You get a special sword in the beginning, which you have to use when you're fighting demons, because they're immune to everything else. But against standard enemies, you get a lot of different weapons as you explore the map. The first chapter focuses on melee weapons and the bow, which has standard and elemental arrows. The range gameplay with the bow feels really clunky because you have to stop and shoot if you really want to hit something. It feels more like using a gun, and for a good reason, because chapter 2 almost completely focuses on actual guns. Using the melee weapons is very simple, but you have to play the game of cat and mouse with the enemy in order to not get hit. Strafing left and right is very fast, which allows you to avoid hits if you're fast enough. So hit and run is the meta strategy of this melee combat, which is far from being great. A simple block mechanic would fix a lot of issues, but the game doesn't have it. Your special sword requires mana to use, which regenerates over time. All the bosses and demons require you to use the sword, which is also very annoying. The special warrior form that I mentioned before is pretty much a cheat code because you can't take any damage. But you also can't use the damn sword in this form, which only makes it usable against regular enemies. On the other side, most enemies die in about 5 hits with the sword, even the bosses, so it's not a huge deal, but you will die in this game a lot. It can be pretty hard to get used to, and the combat just doesn't feel that good. It's even worse with the guns in Chapter 2 and 3, especially because of the AI. Enemies with guns are also using cheats because they can't fucking miss. Seriously, they almost never miss you with a gun, but you can offset this with the warrior form if you have the mana, of course. The challenge is certainly there, but for all the wrong reasons. The difficulty just doesn't feel fair, especially in these situations.
I feel for you.
However, I still have to give major props to this studio for even attempting something ambitious like this in 2002. Chapter 3 is something in between, but you have melee weapons and guns. Unfortunately, pretty much all guns feel the same except the AR, which is way more powerful compared to everything else. The shotgun and even the freaking rocket launcher sucks. You'll get better results by just using the simple pistol. Anyway, I could talk about this game a lot more, and I probably do a separate video about it. Despite all the nice things I had to say about Archangel, it's very hard to recommend it, unless you're really curious about the game now. And like I said, it's abandonware, so you can get it on the internet for free.
Yeah, strange things happen in that company.
Overall, I'm really glad I decided to stick to the very end with this game, and Archangel is certainly a hidden diamond in the rough. Number 2. ReCore. ReCore is an action-adventure that came out in late 2016 on Xbox One and PC. I knew about this game for a long time, and I always wanted to try it out. While I did enjoy my time with this game, I think the gameplay leaves a lot to be desired. It's not bad by any means, and it actually has a great premise. However, it kinda gets repetitive after about 10 hours of gameplay, although the game doesn't overstay its welcome. You can finish it in about 15 to 20 hours max. The beginning of this game is very straightforward. ReCore doesn't try to waste your time for a second, you only get a single sentence about what happened to Earth, which is some sort of a plague called the Dust Devil. This planet is called Far Eden, and you play as Jewel Adams, one of the volunteers for the Utopian colony. She was in the cryosleep for centuries, apparently, and when she woke up, she saw that nothing went according to plan. The story only has a handful of characters that you get to meet as you progress. Many of the colonists disappeared for some reason, and a lot of core bots that were helping the people became corrupted. You need to figure out what happened while exploring these alien planets. You're going to do a lot of platforming puzzles and dungeon crawling that has the combination of two. Jewel is not alone in this mission, she has 3 different core bots that will help her. These core bots have different abilities that are essential for solving the quests, puzzles, and they can also be helpful in combat. The core bots also talk, but you can only notice this if you watch the subtitles because they only mumble some gibberish. Jewel constantly talks to them as you play, which keeps the game from being awkwardly silent all the time. The core bots also have different personalities, which is not a huge deal, but there is definitely some nice attention to detail here. Visually, this game still looks amazing if you ask me. Although I did have some frame drops here and there, but I was pushing the 4K resolution. After a while, I managed to get a stable 60 FPS by just reducing a couple of settings. ReCore had a bunch of technical issues when it came out, and this is one of the reasons why the game didn't sell so well, I guess. People complained about insane loading times, but you won't have any of those issues nowadays on a semi-modern PC. Like I said, ReCore looks amazing, and the artistic style is great. This game uses the colors so well, and it kinda has to because the gameplay depends on the usage of colors. The artistic style makes the exploration of this open world and the indoor areas very pleasant for the eyes. The character models are a bit goofy, but that's only my quote-unquote problem with the visuals, it's like whatever. The best part about the gameplay are puzzles and platforming. I enjoyed jumping around and solving the puzzles in the open world, and especially in dungeons, which are more challenging in general. However, the combat by itself gets very old very fast. The premise of the combat is very interesting because your attacks are color-coded. As you progress through the game, you will unlock different shots with more colors, and you need to mix and match these attacks to kill enemies. The enemies start off really simple, but after about 7 or 6 hours, they go crazy with the colors. They can change and mix colors, which is indicated by their HP bar. You have to keep switching the bullet color while avoiding the attacks by dashing and jumping. The jump and dash feel great in this game, by the way. What's not so great is the shooting itself. You constantly have to rely on the aggressive target lock, even if you use a mouse and keyboard, which I don't recommend for this game. The shooting feels fine, and it sounds good as well, but the targeting system almost ruins the whole gameplay. I think they relied on the color switching parts a bit too much, because it's not enough to keep the shooting interesting. You get to upgrade the core buts and your gun, but this progression system felt very underwhelming as well. The fun part of the combat is the core extraction mechanic. Every enemy has a special core that you can snatch when you deal enough damage to them. It's like a little mini game, which is actually really fun. You have to balance the rope pulling mechanic in order to get the core successfully. But if you want to get the mats for upgrading yourself and the core buts, you have to kill the enemy. It's a very nice gameplay loop, but unfortunately the progression is not very good and the shooting mechanics leave a lot to be desired. Overall, I found the exploration really fun and I enjoyed puzzles and the platforming segments of this game. So I'm still glad I finally got around to play this game despite all the issues I mentioned. If you have the Game Pass on PC and you're bored, be sure to check this one out, but just don't expect amazing shooting mechanics. Number 1. Blacktail. Blacktail is a first-person action adventure which came out in late 2022. This game has some very good reviews on GOG and Steam, and after playing it, I can definitely see why. Blacktail is a weird and a very funny game with very decent gameplay. It's also not a very long game, you can probably finish it in about 10 hours or so. The setting and the story is inspired by the Slavic mythology, which kinda took me by surprise. You play as the girl called Yaga, who is accused of witchcraft and expelled from the settlement. She constantly hears a voice in her head, and you have to unravel the mystery of her past by chasing living memories.
It's been a year now. Painful memories. Good. Pain means you're not dead.
You're going to meet some very goofy but well-written characters with a great sense of humor.
Me? Would I look for honey? I don't even like honey.
I never said you were looking for honey.
Neither did I.
Well, humor is subjective of course, but I think the writing in Blacktail is amazing in general. For example, in this boss fight, the little mushroom guy will throw you some arrows, but not because he wants to help you.
Kill yourself.
Yeah, that kind of humor. There are many similar scenarios with the NPCs in the game. Speaking of characters, they are all very unique, and pretty much none of them are human. The voice acting is very good as well.
You can't move mountains if you can't move yourself.
Oh, the stone said that.
Obviously. I mean, the cat said, obviously.
If you haven't noticed already, the game looks absolutely amazing. The artistic style is very colorful, but more importantly, the whole game is crammed with visual details. The map is like a little open world, and every single location is beautiful to explore. Combined with everything crazy that's going on in the game, it makes the exploration more enjoyable. Speaking of the craziness, if you played any Alice games, you're probably going to like this game as well. The gameplay is pretty good as well for what it's trying to do. It's completely based on the range gameplay. You get to use a bow with a couple of elemental arrows and some special abilities like the dash and the totem. The shooting mechanics are pretty enjoyable in the game. Regular enemies can be killed with basic ranged attacks, while the bosses usually require you to hit specific weak spots while avoiding their mechanics. You constantly have to craft arrows, but you first need to gather the materials. These materials are very common in every area, and even the boss arenas will have more than enough. However, I think this mechanic is more annoying than it should be, even though you can upgrade the amount of arrows you can carry at once. The game's difficulty relies a bit too much on this mechanic. Throughout the whole game you'll find yourself constantly without arrows, running around like a headless chicken and opening up this menu, which is fine, but not so fun in intense boss fights. There are only around 5 boss fights in the game, and I did enjoy all of them pretty much. Even though the game repeats a fight or two with just some added mechanics, but it didn't bother me that much. Especially because I think those fights have a good design in general. The challenge is definitely there, but it's not crazy hard or anything. You have to use the environment a lot in some clever ways in order to beat the bosses. The healing system makes the combat a bit worse than it should be. The only way to heal in this game is to find the right plant or by killing some animals and cooking the meat, which is pretty rare. This means the game has 2 very important mechanics, which can make you run around like a headless chicken all the time in order to find the items you need. And sometimes you just won't be able to find them that fast, which creates this awkward downtime in combat. The dashing ability feels great to use, and the movement in general is pretty good. Not amazing though, I wish it was more snappy, but it's not bad by any means. What I didn't like about the gameplay is the segments where the game turns into a 2D side-scroller. It felt out of place, and the gameplay in those segments is not the best. On top of that, it can also be a bit confusing sometimes, and it feels like it just wastes your time. However, even in those segments, the story and the presentation are pretty damn good, despite my issues with the gameplay. Like I said, this game is pretty short and story-based, so I don't want to spoil a lot. I would highly recommend trying this game out, because I think it's extremely underrated.
Soon, all will know the true meaning of horror.
The gameplay is pretty good, despite the issues I mentioned. The characters are very fun to interact with, and the story is weird and interesting. I had a lot of fun exploring this crazy world, and I really hope to see more games from this little Polish studio.
Oh, you did it!
And that will be it for this episode.
This is a terrible tragedy.
Tell me, did you play any of these games, and which one was your favorite? Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Speaking of supporting the channel, I just launched my personal store where you can buy some interesting t-shirts and hoodies. I think that's a great way to get something back for supporting the channel. And of course, you can always become a Patreon or a YouTube member and get your name on the end credits of my videos. Many thanks to all of my current supporters, and I'll see you in the next one.